The banker's eyes widened as I spread the cash across his desk, $43,000 in neat stacks. 6 months ago, he'd laughed when I'd asked about a business loan. Said a man living in a mine shaft wasn't exactly prime lending material. "Mr. Callahan," he stammered. "I don't understand." "How did you?" "Hard work," I said. "And people who underestimated me." Atlas, my German shepherd, sat at my feet, his tail thumping once against the polished floor. He'd been there for all of it. Every cold night. Every small victory. Every moment the town had written us off. But that came later. First, I had to survive them. 6 months earlier, the Greyhound bus rattled away, leaving me and Atlas on the side of Highway 34 with 2 duffel bags and a few $100s to our names. The Montana sky stretched endless and indifferent above us. Hollowpoint wasn't much of a town, a main street with more closed storefronts than open ones, a diner, a hardware store, and a post office that doubled as a gossip hub. Population signs said 847, but it looked optimistic. I'd chosen it because it was cheap, remote, and no one I knew would look for me here. After 12 years in the Army and 3 tours that left more scars inside than out, I needed quiet. Space. A place where no one knew Sergeant James Callahan or what had happened in Kandahar. Atlas pressed against my leg as we walked into town. He'd been with me for 4 years. A military working dog retired early after an IED blast left him partially deaf in 1 ear. We'd both earned our damage honestly. The diner seemed like a good place to start. A bell chimed as we entered, and conversations died like someone had cut a wire. 12 faces turned toward us with that particular small-town calculation: stranger, veteran patches on his jacket, dog that looked like it could bite. "Help you?" The waitress was 60-ish, all angles and skepticism. "Coffee and information. I'm looking for a place to rent. Something cheap." A man at the counter snorted. "Try Billings. Nothing here for drifters." "I'm not drifting. I'm staying." That got another round of looks. The waitress poured coffee with exaggerated slowness. "Marcy Brennan has a room above her garage. $150 a week." I did the math. My savings would last maybe 3 months at that rate, less if I actually wanted to eat. "Anything else?" "Not unless you want a cab." The man at the counter grinned. "Old Copper Creek mine's been abandoned 20 years. Real cozy." Laughter rippled through the diner. Atlas's ears flattened. "Where is it?" I asked. The grin faltered. "You're serious? Do I look like I'm joking?" The waitress drew a quick map on a napkin, her expression somewhere between pity and amusement. 3 miles north. "But mister, that mine's just a hole in the ground. No water, no power, no heat. Winter comes early here and stays late." "Then I'd better get started." I left money for the coffee and walked out into silence. The mine entrance was exactly what I'd expected, a reinforced shaft driven into the hillside, timber supports still solid despite decades of neglect. Someone had sealed it with a chain-link gate, but the padlock was rusted through. Inside, the main chamber opened into surprising space, maybe 20 by 30 feet, with smaller tunnels branching off into darkness. Atlas explored while I inventoried assets, relatively dry, defensible, hidden from the road by pine trees. The ceiling didn't look immediately collapse-prone. I'd lived in worse in Afghanistan. I set up my tent in the main chamber that first night. Atlas curled against my side as temperatures dropped and darkness swallowed the entrance. Wind moaned through the tunnels like something wounded. This was rock bottom, I thought. 34 years old, living in a hole with a dog, a few $100s, and no plan beyond surviving until tomorrow. But I'd survived worse. We both had. The next morning, I hiked into town and bought supplies at the hardware store: lumber, nails, a handsaw, work gloves. The clerk rang it up with barely concealed curiosity. Building something? Improving something. Within a week, I'd framed out walls in the mine's main chamber, creating an insulated room within the larger space. I scavenged shipping pallets for flooring, keeping us off the cold stone. A camping stove and propane became my kitchen. Water came from a stream a quarter-mile away, hauled in 5-gallon jugs. It was primitive. It was barely adequate. But it was mine. The town's amusement turned to something else, a mix of fascination and disdain. I'd see people slow down on the highway, pointing at the mine entrance. Heard the stories secondhand when I went for supplies. The crazy veteran, the man playing homeless, giving up on life. They didn't understand that I wasn't giving up. I was starting over. stripping everything back to essentials and rebuilding from a foundation I could trust. But talk was cheap, and winter was coming. I could see it in the way the light slanted through the pines, feel it in the morning frost that lasted longer each day. The hardware store clerk took pity on me once, voice low and almost kind. First snow usually hits in October. We're talking 3 feet. Temperatures down to 20 below. 6 weeks away. I'll manage, I said. His expression said what his mouth didn't. No, you won't. September brought the first serious cold snap, temperatures dropping into the 20s at night. I woke one morning to find Atlas's water bowl frozen solid and my breath clouding the air inside my insulated room. This was just a preview. The real test was coming. I spent every daylight hour preparing. Cut and split firewood until my hands bled, stacking it against the mine's interior wall where it would stay dry. Built a ventilated stove from a steel drum I'd salvaged from the dump, with a pipe running up and out through a gap I'd carved between timber supports. The engineering was rough, but it worked. Heat without carbon monoxide poisoning. The hardware store became my second home. I'd stand in the aisles studying insulation techniques, memorizing prices, calculating what I could afford versus what I needed. The owner, Bill Patterson, started leaving damaged goods aside for me. Dented cans, torn bags of concrete, bent tools that still functioned. Can't sell these anyway, he'd say, not meeting my eyes. Charity dressed as pragmatism. I took them. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. But supplies cost money, and my savings were evaporating. I needed income. The diner had a help wanted sign, but the owner took one look at my mineshaft address and found reasons I wasn't suitable. Same story at the gas station, the grocery, the feed store. Finally, I started offering services door to door. Handyman work, yard cleanup, anything. Most people closed their doors politely. Some not so politely. Don't need help from someone who can't even help himself? One man said, looking at my worn jacket and dirt-stained jeans. But Marcy Brennan, the woman with the garage apartment I'd never rented, surprised me. She had a fence falling down and a shed roof leaking. I gave her an estimate half what anyone else would charge. She studied me for a long moment. You any good? Yes, ma'am. Army taught me to build things that last. Fine, but the dog stays outside while you work. Atlas lay on her lawn for 3 days while I rebuilt her fence and patched her roof. She never offered water or conversation, but she paid in cash when I finished and added an extra 20. Do good work, she said. I'll mention it. Word spread slowly. A garage door repair here, a deck restoration there. Never enough to feel secure, but enough to keep going. I worked harder than I'd worked at anything. 12-hour days swinging hammers and mixing concrete, then hiking back to the mine as darkness fell. Atlas and I would sit by the stove, eating simple meals, rice, beans, whatever meat was marked down at the store. I'd run my hands through his fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, and try not to think about how precarious everything was. One injury, one cold snap before I was ready, 1 week without work, and it would all collapse. October arrived with the first snow, just a dusting, gone by noon, but a warning shot. I intensified my preparations, sealed every gap in my walls with expanding foam, hung heavy tarps as door covers, built a cold storage area in one of the side tunnels where temperatures would stay just above freezing. The town's mockery evolved into something different. I catch people watching me in the hardware store, at the diner, along the street. Not laughing anymore, but not quite respectful either. More like they were waiting for the inevitable, for winter to break me, for reality to force me back to whatever normal life they thought I should be living. Bill Patterson was more direct. You know there's no shame in leaving, he said one afternoon as I paid for caulking. This town's seen plenty of people move on. I'm not moving on. I'm digging in. There's a difference between tough and foolish, son. Yes, sir. I learned that difference in places where foolish gets you killed. I'm still here. He had no answer for that. The real snow came the second week of November. 18 inches overnight. Temperatures plummeting to single digits. I woke to absolute silence, that peculiar quiet of heavy snow, and pushed through the tarp covering my entrance. The world had transformed into white emptiness, my carefully cleared path buried, the town below invisible through curtains of falling snow. Atlas bounded into it, his dark shape stark against the white, and for a moment I felt something like joy. Not happiness exactly, but the satisfaction of a battle met head-on. The stove kept us warm. My stockpiled food kept us fed. The work I'd done held against the cold. I'd been right, and the town had been wrong. But winter had barely started. The propane ran out on a Wednesday. I'd miscalculated consumption, stretched my budget too thin. The camping stove went cold, which meant no hot food, no melted snow for washing, no warm drinks to drive the chill from my bones. I hiked into town through knee-deep snow, Atlas struggling beside me. The hardware store's heater felt like heaven. Bill looked up from his register, took in my appearance, the ice in my beard, the exhaustion in my eyes. "Propane's $60 for a tank," he said. I had $43 in my pocket. Needed $20 for food. Did the math and came up short again. "I can work it off," I said. "Whatever you need done." In this weather? Nothing needs doing that won't wait for spring. We stood there, the truth hanging between us. I was failing. Slowly, quietly, but failing nonetheless. Then Bill sighed. "Got a storage room needs organizing. Tomorrow morning, 6 hours work. I'll pay you in propane and throw in 40 cash." "Thank you," I managed. "Don't thank me. Just don't die up there." Paperwork would be terrible. December turned brutal. Temperatures stayed below zero for 2 weeks straight. Snow piled 4 feet deep around the mine entrance, and I carved a tunnel through it each morning just to reach the outside world. My beard froze solid on the walk to town. Atlas developed a limp from ice cutting his paws, and I fashioned him booties from canvas and duct tape. But something was shifting. The work Bill had given me led to more. Organizing storerooms for other businesses, shoveling commercial roofs, hauling supplies through snow when delivery trucks couldn't make it through. The town needed hands willing to work in the cold, and I'd proven I could endure what others wouldn't. Marcy Brennan hired me to weatherproof her elderly neighbor's house. That neighbor had a friend who needed pipes insulated. That friend knew someone whose generator needed repairs. The chain grew, link by link. I saved every dollar I didn't absolutely need for survival. Watch my coffee can fill with bills, 20s, 50s, once 100. The work was brutal, the hours endless, but I was building something. Not just savings. Proof. The town's attitude changed too, though I only noticed in retrospect. The hardware store clerk started greeting me by name. The diner waitress poured my coffee without being asked and sometimes forgot to charge for pie. People nodded on the street instead of looking away. I wasn't the crazy veteran anymore. I was the guy who'd made it work. January brought the worst storm I'd ever seen. 3 days of whiteout conditions, wind that screamed through the mine tunnels, temperatures hitting 30 below. I burned through firewood at an unsustainable rate, keeping the stove fed around the clock. Atlas and I huddled together, and I wondered if Patterson had been right. If I'd confused stubborn for strong, foolish for brave. On the 3rd day, I heard engines. Looked out to see Bill Patterson on a snowmobile, pulling a sled loaded with firewood and supplies. "Figured you might be running short," he called over the wind. I helped him unload. Couldn't quite manage words. "Listen," he said before leaving. "Town council's looking for someone to manage the community center. Maintenance, event setup, basic repairs. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. Comes with a small salary and a basement apartment." I shook my head. "I appreciate it, but I'm not finished. They want someone reliable. Someone who shows up no matter what. Someone who's proven they're here for the long haul." He met my eyes. "That's you, Callahan. Job's yours if you want it." "Why?" "Because you did what you said you'd do. That matters." After he left, I sat with Atlas by the stove, thinking about basements and steady paychecks and the easy path I was being offered. Everything I theoretically wanted when I'd arrived 6 months ago. But I'd learned something in this mine, in this winter. I didn't need saving. I needed purpose. And I found it not in comfort, but in the struggle itself. I kept working, kept saving. And one morning in March, when the snow finally started melting and the first hints of green appeared on the hillsides, I realized I had enough. Not just enough to survive. Enough to build. Which is how I ended up in the bank that April morning, spreading cash across the desk while the banker, who'd dismissed me 6 months earlier, struggled to find words. "I want to buy the Copper Creek property," I said. "The mine and surrounding 40 acres. I checked the county records. It's been abandoned long enough to be available for back taxes and fees." "Mr. Callahan, that's not exactly prime real estate. It's my home, and I'm going to prove what it can be." He processed the payment with trembling hands. I walked out with a deed and a plan. Over the next 6 months, I transformed the mine. Installed solar panels on the hillside, battery storage in a side tunnel, a rainwater collection system. Proper insulation, real walls, salvaged windows that let in light. Built a workshop in one of the larger chambers. Created something that was no longer surviving but thriving. I took the community center job too, because Bill was right, showing up mattered. But my real work happened at the mine, building furniture and fixtures I sold to stores in Billings and Bozeman. Word spread about the quality, the craftsmanship, the story behind them. People wanted things made by the veteran who had lived through that winter. A year after I'd arrived, Marcy Brennan stopped by the mine. I'd finished the exterior by then. A proper entrance with a door, landscaping that made it look intentional rather than desperate. Wanted to see if the rumors were true, she said, looking around. What rumors? That you'd built something worth seeing. She smiled, the first time I'd seen warmth on her face. They were right. You proved us all wrong, Mr. Callahan. I wasn't trying to prove anything. Just trying to live. Same thing sometimes. Atlas wandered over, older now, but still solid. She scratched his ears, and I thought about that first day in the diner. The laughter, the assumption that I'd fail. They hadn't been cruel. Just realistic, by their standards. But they'd never spend a winter in Kandahar. Never learned that survival isn't about comfort. It's about commitment. About deciding what you're willing to endure and then enduring it. As Marcy left, I stood at my mine entrance, looking out over the valley. The town spread below, smoke rising from chimneys. Life continuing its small-town rhythms. I was part of it now, but on my own terms. Not because I'd bent to their expectations, but because I'd exceeded them. Atlas leaned against my leg, his weight familiar and grounding. We made it, I told him. His tail thumped twice. He'd never doubted.